The morning sunlight glinted off Colonel Tariq Hassan's polished metals as he straightened his dress uniform one final time. 22 years in the Space Defense Force had taught him precision in all things. The weight of responsibility sat heavy on his shoulders today, not from the brass decorations, but from the promise he'd made to a grieving mother 3 days ago. "I'll bring her home myself," he had told Mrs. Chen, his voice steady despite the ache in his chest. "Amina will not make this journey alone." Now he stood in the military terminal of Gateway Station, the massive orbiting port that connected Earth to its colonies across 3 star systems. Behind him waited the flag-draped casket containing the remains of Private Amina Chen, who had died saving 12 civilians during the attack on New Carthage colony. A young lieutenant approached, saluting sharply. "Transport is ready for boarding, sir. We've reserved the dignitary section for you and Private Chen." Hassan nodded. "Thank you, Lieutenant. Her family will be waiting at the colony port." The lieutenant's eyes lingered on the casket. "Was she under your command, sir?" "I trained her," Hassan said, memories flooding back of the bright-eyed recruit who had worked twice as hard as anyone else. She had the makings of an exceptional pilot. As they approached the boarding gate, a transit officer in the gray uniform of the Galactic Transit Authority stepped forward. The man's eyes flicked from Hassan's face to his identification badge, and back again. "Credentials, please," he said, his tone flat. Hassan handed over his military ID and transit authorization. Standard procedure, though something in the officer's demeanor put him on alert. The officer studied the documents longer than necessary. "Purpose of travel?" "Escort duty," Hassan replied, gesturing to the casket being carefully loaded onto a hovering transport platform. "Returning a fallen soldier to her home colony." The officer's eyes narrowed slightly. "Wait here, Colonel." Hassan stood at parade rest, watching as the officer disappeared into a side office. Through the glass partition, he could see the man speaking with a superior, occasionally glancing back toward Hassan. Something wasn't right. 5 minutes passed. Around him, other military personnel and civilians moved through the boarding process without delay. The transport would depart in 20 minutes. Finally, the officer returned with a senior GTA official. "Colonel Hassan," the senior official said, "I'm afraid there's an issue with your transit clearance." "What issue?" Hassan asked. "I have priority alpha authorization from Defense Command." The official handed back Hassan's credentials. "Your security clearance has been temporarily suspended. New protocols." "New protocols." Hassan's voice remained calm, though he felt his pulse quicken. "I wasn't informed of any change." "Security concerns," the official said vaguely. "Given the recent attacks, we're implementing stricter background checks for certain travelers." Hassan noticed a white officer with colonel's insignia passing through the checkpoint without additional scrutiny. The man carried identical credentials to Hassan's. "I'm escorting a fallen soldier home to her family," Hassan said, steel entering his voice. "I gave them my word she wouldn't travel alone." "The remains will be transported as scheduled," the official replied. "You, however, will need to remain on station pending clearance review." "On what grounds?" Hassan demanded. The official's expression hardened. "This isn't a negotiation, Colonel." "Next." As Hassan stepped aside, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Mrs. Chen. "Will you be with her for the journey, Colonel? We're preparing to receive you both." Hassan looked up to see Private Chen's casket being loaded onto the transport without him. The flag shifted slightly, revealing the names stenciled on the side. Through the large viewing windows, he watched as the white colonel who had passed through security took a seat in the dignitary section, a section that should have contained both Hassan and Private Chen. Hassan stared at Mrs. Chen's message, then at the departing transport. 22 years of following orders warred with the promise he had made. In his mind, he saw Amina Chen's determined face during her first flight simulation. "I'll get her home," he typed in response. "I promise." He turned away from the gate, his decision already made. If the official channels wouldn't allow him to keep his promise, he would find another way. Private Amina Chen deserved better than politics and prejudice. She deserved honor, and Colonel Tariq Hassan was going to ensure she received it, no matter what it cost him. Colonel Hassan strode through the gleaming corridors of Gateway Station, his reflection distorted in the curved metal walls. His face remained composed, but his mind raced through options, each more desperate than the last. The clock was ticking. Private Chen's transport would leave the station in less than 3 hours. He pressed his palm against the security scanner outside Captain Sora Nakamura's office. They had trained together 15 years ago, before different assignments had sent them on separate paths. If anyone could understand his situation, it would be her. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Captain Nakamura looked up from her desk, her expression shifting from surprise to concern as she took in Hassan's rigid posture. "Tariq, I thought you were escorting Chen's remains to New Carthage today." "That was the plan," Hassan replied, closing the door behind him. "Transit Authority denied my clearance. Security protocols, they said." Nakamura's eyes narrowed. "They let the casket through without you?" "Yes. They claimed my background required additional verification." The bitterness he'd kept from his voice at the checkpoint seeped through now. "I watched a white officer with identical credentials walk right past me." "They can't do this, Tariq," Nakamura said, slamming her fist on the desk. The impact sent a stack of digital tablets sliding across the surface. "They did," Hassan replied. "And Chen's remains ship out in 3 hours without me." Nakamura stood and moved to the window overlooking the docking bay. Her reflection showed the wheels turning behind her eyes. "What about appealing to command?" Hassan shook his head. "Not enough time. By the time they override the Transit Authority, the transport will be halfway to New Carthage." "And you promised her family," Nakamura said softly. "It wasn't a question." Hassan nodded, remembering the call with Mrs. Chen 3 days ago. The woman's quiet dignity as she asked if her daughter would be accompanied home. The relief in her voice when Hassan promised to stay with Amina until she was safely delivered to her family. Nakamura pulled up a map on her screen, her fingers moving rapidly across the display. "My courier ship can make the journey. It's not designed for passenger transport, but it's fast." Hassan studied the small vessel's specifications. "Unofficial channels." "Completely unofficial," Nakamura confirmed, "and technically against regulations." "You'd risk your commission?" Hassan asked, searching her face. Nakamura met his gaze steadily. "You trained her, didn't you?" "Chen, I mean." Hassan's mind flashed back to the flight academy 3 years ago. 19-year-old Amina Chen, 5 feet 4 inches of determination and raw talent. How she'd stayed after hours to perfect her simulation scores. The pride in her eyes when she'd qualify top of her class. "Yes," he said quietly. "I recommended her for the Special Operations Unit. The same unit she was serving with when she died saving those colonists." Hassan nodded, the memory still fresh. The report had come in just a week ago. 12 colonists trapped during the attack on New Carthage. Private Chen, piloting the evacuation craft, had held position under enemy fire while the civilians boarded. She'd taken a direct hit just as the last colonist was secured, staying at the controls long enough to get the craft to safety before succumbing to her injuries. "Then we both owe her," Nakamura said, grabbing her jacket from the back of her chair. "Sometimes you have to break rules to keep promises." She checked her watch. "My ship is docked in Bay 14. Maintenance level access will let us bypass the main terminal. We'll need to move fast." Hassan hesitated, the weight of what they were considering settling over him. "Sora, if we do this, we'll both face consequences," she finished for him. "Probably court-martial. Definitely end of career." "I can't ask you to." "You're not asking," she cut him off. "I'm offering. And we're wasting time discussing it." Hassan thought of Private Chen's parents waiting at the colony port, of the young soldier who had given her life doing what was right, not what was safe. "We'll need to retrieve her casket from the transport loading bay," he said, decision made, "and find a way past security." Nakamura smiled grimly, already accessing the station's shipping manifests on her tablet. Leave that to me. I still have friends in cargo operations. Together they left the office, moving with purpose but without hurry to avoid attention. Just two officers going about their business. No one would know until it was too late that they had chosen honor over obedience, promise over protocol. And if it ended their careers, Hassan knew some prices were worth paying. Private Amina Chen had paid the ultimate price doing what was right. He could do no less. The small military courier ship broke away from Gateway Station with minimal thrust, drifting rather than blasting into space. Inside the cramped cockpit, Colonel Hassan watched the massive structure recede through the viewscreen, while Captain Nakamura ran system checks beside him. Cloaking our departure signature, Nakamura said, her fingers dancing across the controls. We need to be 10,000 kilometers out before we can safely accelerate. In the ship's tiny cargo hold, Private Chen's casket had been secured with straps and padding. Hassan had personally ensured the flag remained perfectly draped, transferring her with military precision despite their hurried departure. How long before they notice? Hassan asked, studying the rear scanners for pursuit. The shipping manifest shows her casket still awaiting transfer to the official transport. That buys us maybe 60 minutes before someone physically checks and realizes it's gone. The station grew smaller behind them. Hassan felt a curious mixture of calm and tension. 22 years of following orders, and now he was technically stealing military property and absconding with a courier vessel. Unknown vessel, identify yourself immediately, crackled the radio, shattering the moment of reflection. Nakamura's eyes widened. That was faster than expected. Hassan reached over and switched off the communication system. We have 4 hours before they scramble pursuit ships. Our head start matters more than responding. Once they cleared the station's traffic zone, Nakamura engaged the main engines. The small ship surged forward, acceleration pressing them into their seats. The stars outside stretched into lines as they pushed toward the system boundary. Course to New Carthage plotted, she said. 28 hours at maximum sustainable speed. Hassan nodded, checking the engine readings. The courier wasn't designed for this kind of extended high-speed journey, but it would hold. It had to. They passed the orbit of Mars without incident, the red planet a distant smudge to port. Hassan allowed himself to relax slightly, reaching for the thermos of coffee Nakamura had thoughtfully packed. The warning lights caught them both by surprise, flashing angry red across the cockpit. Proximity alert, Nakamura said, hands flying to the controls. Something big directly ahead. The view screen adjusted automatically, revealing a roiling mass of energy stretching across their path. A solar storm of massive proportions, throwing radiation and charged particles into their course. Navigation computer is recommending a course change, Nakamura said, studying the readouts. Going around would add at least 36 hours to our journey. Hassan leaned forward, examining the storm's pattern. As a pilot instructor, he'd studied phenomena like this, even trained cadets in simulation, including Private Chen. We can't go around, he said. By then, they'll have alerted all colonial checkpoints. We'd never make it to New Carthage. Nakamura looked at him. The alternative is flying through that storm. The radiation levels are off the charts. Not through the main body, Hassan said. He pointed to a section of the display. There's a narrow channel of reduced activity here, running through the center of the disturbance. The radiation is still high, but not immediately lethal. Nakamura stared at the readings. That's a channel barely wider than our ship in places. The slightest miscalculation. I can navigate it, Hassan said with quiet confidence. I've trained for conditions like this. In simulation, maybe. This is suicide flying, Tarek. Hassan's eyes moved to the cargo hold indicator on the display. Private Chen's casket showed as a simple box icon, secured and waiting. I promised her family, he said simply. After a moment, Nakamura nodded. Your hands on the controls, then. I'll manage the shields and power distribution. Hassan took manual control, feeling the subtle vibration of the ship translate through the steering yoke. They approached the edge of the storm, the ship's outer sensors already registering increased radiation. Diverting auxiliary power to forward shields, Nakamura reported, cutting non-essential systems. The cockpit darkened as lighting reduced to emergency levels. Temperature would drop next, then artificial gravity would weaken. All power needed for the shields and navigation. They entered the storm's outer boundary, and the ship shuddered as if struck. Warning indicators flashed across every panel. Outside, space itself seemed to boil with energy, beautiful and deadly. Channel entrance approaching, Nakamura said, her voice tight. Radiation spiking. Hull integrity at 92%. Hassan's world narrowed to the controls under his hands and the navigation display. His movements became minute, precise adjustments that kept them centered in the dangerous corridor of relatively calm space within the storm. A particularly violent surge rocked the ship, throwing them sideways. Hassan corrected instantly, muscles moving from memory and instinct. Port stabilizers failing, Nakamura called out. Compensating with maneuvering thrusters. Hassan didn't respond, his entire being focused on the path ahead. In his mind, he could almost hear Private Chen's voice from her training days. Trust the ship, sir. Let it talk to you. And so he did, becoming one with the small vessel as they threaded their way through the heart of the storm, carrying their precious cargo toward home. The courier ship limped toward New Carthage, its hull scorched from the solar storm. Half the instrument panels flickered or remained dark entirely, systems pushed beyond their limits during the desperate passage. Captain Nakamura had been working for hours to restore basic functions, while Colonel Hassan maintained their course, with the few navigational tools still operating. We made it, Nakamura said, wiping sweat from her forehead. She looked exhausted but triumphant. I didn't think that was possible. Hassan allowed himself a small smile. Private Chen would have managed it better, he said. She had natural talent. The ship's long-range sensors pinged weakly, drawing their attention to the view screen. New Carthage appeared as a blue-green jewel against the blackness of space. Home to nearly 50,000 colonists, it was one of humanity's most successful off-world settlements, and Private Chen's final resting place. Something's not right, Nakamura said, adjusting the sensor parameters. I'm picking up multiple ships in orbit. Hassan frowned, studying the readings. Military configuration. At least 6 vessels. As they drew closer, the ships became visible. Sleek patrol craft bearing the distinctive gray markings of the Galactic Transit Authority. The same organization that had denied Hassan passage. Approaching vessel, identify yourself immediately. The transmission came through crystal clear despite their damaged communication systems. Hassan exchanged a look with Nakamura before responding. This is Colonel Tariq Hassan of the Space Defense Force, requesting landing clearance for New Carthage Colony. There was a pause before the reply came. Colonel Hassan, you are operating an unauthorized vessel and transporting restricted cargo. Maintain your current position and prepare to be boarded. Restricted cargo, Nakamura whispered. They're talking about Chen's remains. Hassan switched off the transmitter. They've established a blockade. But why? What could possibly justify preventing a fallen soldier from returning home? The colony itself came into view as they approached. The main settlement sprawled across a verdant valley, but something was happening at the spaceport. Even from orbit, they could see unusual activity. Crowds gathering, security forces deployed. We need more information, Hassan said. He reached for the tablet containing Private Chen's personal effects, which they had retrieved along with her casket. The device was military issue, designed to withstand combat conditions. It had remained inactive during their journey, its battery preserved for their arrival. Hassan pressed his thumb to the scanner, expecting it to reject his print, but to his surprise, the screen illuminated. She authorized you, Nakamura said, watching over his shoulder. I was her commanding officer, Hassan replied, though something about this didn't feel routine. A subordinate wouldn't typically grant access to personal files. The tablet contained the standard military applications and a few personal photos. Chen with her family, with fellow recruits. Nothing unusual. Hassan was about to set it aside when an alert appeared. One encrypted message awaiting biometric verification. "That's odd," he said, showing Nakamura. "It's requiring secondary verification. My voice print and retinal scan." "She locked something specifically to you," Nakamura said. "Something she wanted only you to access." Hassan completed the verification process. The message opened, revealing not text, but a video file dated 3 days before Chen's death. Her face appeared on screen, her expression serious. "Colonel Hassan, if you're watching this, then I didn't make it back." Her voice was steady, professional. "What I'm about to share can't go through official channels. During reconnaissance on the border settlements, I discovered something disturbing." Chen's report unfolded with military precision. Evidence of transit authority officials collaborating with the same enemy forces that would eventually kill her. Supply manifests, security overrides, patrol schedules, all pointing to deliberate sabotage from within. "The attack on our position wasn't random," Chen continued. "They knew exactly where to hit us, and the only way they could have known was through someone with access to our mission parameters." The final piece was a list of names. Transit authority officials implicated in the conspiracy. At the top was Deputy Director Vance, the same man who had denied Hassan's clearance at Gateway Station. "She knew," Hassan whispered as the recording ended. "That's why they didn't want me bringing her home. They were afraid of what she might have discovered, what she might have told me." On the colony surface below, Chen's parents waited, surrounded by colonists demanding answers about the blockade and rumors of a rogue officer bringing their daughter home against orders. The ship's communication system crackled again. "Colonel Hassan, this is your final warning. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded." Hassan looked at the tablet, then at the video still frozen on Chen's determined face. Her final battle wasn't over, and neither was his. "Prepare for atmospheric entry," he told Nakamura. "We're going in." The colony governor's office overlooked New Carthage's central plaza, where hundreds of colonists had gathered since news broke of the blockade. Governor Maya Santos studied the evidence displayed on the screen before her expression growing darker with each document. "This goes all the way to Transit Command," she said finally, looking up at Colonel Hassan and Captain Nakamura. "These navigation coordinates, security clearances, they couldn't have accessed these without highest-level authorization." Hassan nodded. He had expected as much after reviewing Private Chen's files. "That's why we need the press here when we land with her remains. The public needs to see what's happening." Their landing had been unconventional but effective. With transit authority ships blocking official channels, Nakamura had taken their damaged courier through a maintenance passage in the colony's environmental shield. It wasn't designed for vessels their size, but with Hassan's piloting, they had scraped through with only minor additional damage. The colony's security forces, loyal to Governor Santos rather than Earth authorities, had secured their arrival. Now Chen's casket rested in a side chamber, waiting for its final journey to her family's home. "The Transit Authority is demanding I turn you both over," Santos said, "along with Private Chen's remains and all her personal effects." "And your response?" Nakamura asked. The governor smiled thinly. "I informed them that colonial sovereignty allows me 48 hours to review any extradition request." Hassan's tablet beeped with an incoming transmission. "They're not waiting," he said, displaying the message. 6 Transit Authority ships are descending toward the colony. They'll be here in 20 minutes. Santos stood, decision made. "Then we move now. My security team will escort Chen's remains to the Memorial Plaza. The colony broadcast system is at your disposal, Colonel." As they left the office, Hassan's mind worked through options. A direct confrontation with Transit Authority forces could end badly for everyone. But allowing them to seize Chen's evidence and silence her final message wasn't acceptable either. "We need to transmit everything," Nakamura said as they hurried through the government building. "Not just to the colony, but to all military channels. And news networks," Hassan added. "Once it's public, they can't suppress it." The Memorial Plaza was New Carthage's heart, a beautiful open space where colonists gathered for celebrations and remembrances. Today it was packed with people awaiting Chen's arrival, her parents standing at the front near the speaker's platform. Behind them, large screens displayed the colony's symbol alongside the Space Defense Force emblem. As Hassan walked behind Chen's casket, carried by 6 colonial security officers, the crowd parted silently. He saw anger in some faces, confusion in others, and in many, determination. These people knew something was wrong, even if they didn't understand exactly what. The casket was placed carefully on a raised platform, draped with the colony flag. Chen's parents approached, her mother touching the polished surface gently before turning to Hassan with tearful gratitude. "You kept your promise," she said simply. Before Hassan could respond, the colony's warning system activated. Above them, 6 transit authority ships descended through the clouds, taking position directly over the plaza. "Colonel Hassan," a voice boomed from the lead ship's external speakers. "This is Deputy Director Vance of the Galactic Transit Authority. Surrender your vessel and Private Chen's remains immediately, or we will be forced to take action." Hassan looked at Nakamura, who nodded and activated the transmitter they had prepared. It would broadcast on all frequencies, military, civilian, and news channels throughout the system. Hassan stepped to the colony's communication podium, aware that every colonist in the plaza was watching him. Aware, too, that cameras were capturing everything for viewers across human space. "This is Colonel Tariq Hassan," he began, his voice steady. "I stand before you with the remains of Private Amina Chen, who died protecting this colony and uncovering a conspiracy within the Galactic Transit Authority." On screens throughout the plaza, Chen's evidence began to play, documents, recordings, and finally her own voice explaining what she had discovered. The transit authority ships overhead remained motionless as their own treachery was revealed to all watching. "Private Chen gave her life to protect others," Hassan continued. "She discovered that officials within transit authority have been collaborating with our enemies, providing them with classified information that led to attacks on multiple colonies, including the one that took her life." He looked directly at the hovering ships. "She died a hero, and no amount of discrimination, intimidation, or corruption will prevent her from receiving the honor she deserves." 3 weeks later, Colonel Hassan stood again in Gateway Station, watching through the same windows where his journey had begun. On the main news screen, footage showed Transit Command Headquarters on Earth, where investigators continued to gather evidence. Deputy Director Vance and 12 other officials had been arrested. The investigation had expanded to 3 other departments. Most importantly, new anti-discrimination protocols were being implemented across all military and transit systems, with external oversight to prevent abuse. Hassan fingered the new insignia on his uniform. He had been promoted and appointed to lead the implementation team for the reforms, a position he had accepted only after ensuring Private Chen received full military honors and recognition for her sacrifice. At the memorial service on New Carthage, he had placed his colonel's insignia beside her name on the monument, a small gesture, but meaningful to her family. "They tried to stop us," he had whispered to her memorial. "They regretted it." Now, watching the stars through the station window, Hassan knew Chen's legacy would live on in more than just a monument. It would live in a system forever changed, because one soldier had the courage to stand against corruption, and another had refused to let her journey end in injustice.